You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And welcome to what is essentially the last head-to-head Star Wars podcast of 2023. It just actually popped in my head tonight that this is the final episode of 2023. So overall, yeah, exactly. So before we get into this whole Rebel Moon thing, what did you what were some of the highlights of 2023 and maybe some of the lowlights, if that's even a word?
Some of the highlights, of course, I think we got a lot of interesting Star Wars news. We did get, what's this year, Mandalorian? In the season 3, right? Season 3.
Man, you know what? I don't know. See, this is what happens when you don't. Usually, this would have been something that we would have prepped, and I know we actually threatened to do like a whole, let's do a year-end wrap-up or something for the show or whatever, and that was really originally going to be the intent, but yeah, then of course the Rebel Moon thing came out, and I wanted to talk about that, and then this whole 2023 thing, like I said, just sort of popped in my head that, oh yeah, this is the last one, so, I think so, but I'm not sure. It doesn't seem like it, though. It seems like it came out a while ago. But then again, I was listening to a music show earlier, and they were talking about a bunch of albums that came out. They were doing like the top 5 albums of 2023 kind of thing. And what was funny was there was a bunch of them that people mentioned. I'm like, oh man, was that this year? Because it seems like, 2 years ago or something now. So it could very well. Are you looking it up?
Of course I did.
Did I buy you enough time to do it?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes, yes, Mandalorian season 3 ended in April of
Okay, yeah. Because we got that and we got Ahsoka, which, depending on where you stand, that could be one of the what we'll just call there's the highlights and then there's the not so highlights. Things that stand out. I mean, it stands out for all the wrong reasons. What about Bad Batch?
Yeah, Bad Batch, I mean...
That was earlier this year, wasn't it? Like February?
I
think Tales of the Jedi might have been, too.
Yeah, Tales of the Jedi definitely was... And I love that was definitely a highlight.
Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of really cool Star Wars projects that came out this year. I mean, like you said, I mean, there was a lot...
Visions
well, yeah.
for you.
Hey, you actually, more often than not, stated that you liked the episode and gave it a pretty decent rating. So there is that. Just saying.
Yeah, it was. It was better. Bad Batch did end in March of this year. So Bad Batch was a really great series.
I know. I still got to watch the rest of it. I still haven't finished like the last 3 episodes. I basically stopped where our review stopped. And then I never picked it up again because I forgot something came out. It was probably The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian, I think, actually came out like right towards the end of the whole Bad Batch thing. And we just instantly had to shift gears to that. And I remember we were trying to do both. Like the Monday show was Bad Batch, and I think Friday was Mandalorian or something. But for some reason, there was just so much coming out that we just... like we could not keep up with it. So we had to pretty much leave the whole Bad Batch thing. You, I remember, ended up going back and watching the rest of the episodes. Where I didn't really.
I know, because we were supposed to actually finish it, and I think that's why I finished it, because I wanted to just catch up, and then for whatever reason, we didn't end up.
Yeah, I know. Still to this day. I mean, we really, honestly, we should. Even if it's just like a pre-record, okay, let's just knock them all out and then release them, because, I mean, for the audience that goes back and watches it on demand, they'd probably be like, well, where's the rest of it, Ted Adam Green joins us. He says, for me, Ahsoka was my whole year's highlight for all shows and movies watched. It was the most fun for me, not saying it was the best. For me, Foundation on Apple was that. But Ahsoka, despite its flaws, was my favorite. And again, you and I both talked about how even though we were pretty much tearing it up, every single review that we were doing, we still talk about how much we still enjoyed it, though. Like, even though technically it wasn't great, we enjoyed it. So there is that.
Yeah, that that is true.
Sometimes
Um,
that happens, right?
yeah, I mean, sometimes just because it may not be good, but it's still, you know, there's some shows that you like because I don't know, this gives you that feeling, but it's like technically a good thing. So, um,
Well, all right. So maybe, I don't know, maybe next week we'll go into a little bit of a deeper, um, like retrospective type of
we
thing.
could we could talk about our favorite shows and why of 2020 and what we're looking forward to for
Yeah.
24. We could do
Yeah.
that.
That could be like our next thing. Absolutely. I mean, Monday is January 1st after all. It'd be like the perfect thing
Hmm.
for like a kickoff, the new year and sort of wrap up the previous year. Yeah. No, that would be a good idea. But as for tonight, we're going to talk about this Rebel Moon movie that premiered on Netflix last week, I think. And essentially, for those of you who don't know, this was supposed to be a Star Wars movie. That's the whole reason why we're bringing it up tonight. Now, this isn't going to be an actual review of the movie per se. I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about what was in it and what we liked and didn't like and all that stuff. But this is not going to be a traditional review, although we welcome everybody's comments who maybe want to review it, whether you're watching us live or in the chats. And like I said, certainly we're going to give our thoughts on it. But I guess the way that we're framing this is, would this have been better as a Star Wars movie? So in other words, this was a film that Zack Snyder pitched to Lucasfilm as a Star Wars movie. Lucasfilm turned it down. I mean, that should have been I can't even imagine, right? Because you're sitting there thinking like, wow, with all the stuff these guys have greenlit, they're looking at this going, you know what, we're going to pass. But whatever. They ended up passing on it. Snyder still felt that it was a good thing that he wanted to pursue. So he ended up just reworking it and just releasing it as Rebel Moon and pretty much taking all the Star Wars out of it. And so the question that we're posing to you guys, and of course we're posing to each other, is after seeing this thing, we could talk about the good things, the flaws, all that stuff. But should it have just stayed a Star Wars movie? In other words, would this have made a better Star Wars film than a standalone film? And keep in mind, this is only part one. I think it's a trilogy. I'm not entirely sure, though. This is part one. Part two comes out in April. I'm not entirely sure if part three came out. Because, again, I remember hearing about this a couple years ago, something like that Snyder was pitching a Star Wars film. But then I didn't hear anything about it. And then I did hear that he was going to be doing his own abandoned Star Wars project. And this is around the time, I think, last year when Army of Darkness premiered on Netflix. Because he has that whole Netflix deal. And that's the whole reason why he ended up doing this, was because he was like, okay, Lucasfilm doesn't want it, fine. I'll just do it as part of my Netflix deal. And I actually really enjoyed Army of Darkness quite a bit. So now we had this Rebel Moon movie. What'd you think? I always like to start with you, and then I like kick in there. No, I mean, I'll tell you flat out right now. In spite of its flaws, which there were some things that drove me insane about it, like all the slow-mo. The slow-mo just kept taking me out of the movie the whole time. I'm like, dude, it's like you just discovered a new trick, and now you got to use it in every scene. But I have to say that overall, the story, and some of the performance, the dialogue was terrible. I mean, like I said, there were some definite problems with this movie. And if you watch all the reviews on YouTube, everybody talks about it. There's a lot of people that really loved it, but most of the people are basically trashing it.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, for me, I thought the story was really good, and I enjoyed it. It was kind of like an Ahsoka thing for me. Like, in spite of all of its many flaws, I'm like, you know what? I'm kind of into this. I'm into the story. I'm into the background. I mean, unlike Rey, at least.
So when you say it's more like Ahsoka, you're talking about how you felt about it, or you're
Yeah.
saying like the story was like Ahsoka?
No. How I felt about it. How I felt
Okay.
about it in the sense of, even
The
though,
same
you
way that
know,
you thought about
well,
Ahsoka's
it's just like what we
Ahsoka series.
said, right? Yeah, exactly. Like
Mhm.
what you and I were just talking about in this whole intro, where we were like, okay, well, even though every week when we reviewed Ahsoka, we were talking about all the issues with it, to the point where the people that really loved Ahsoka were starting to call us out on it. Like, okay, you guys are kind of dumping on the show. And it's like, well, no, you have to understand, we're pointing out the flaws because, I mean, we're reviewing it, right? But even though it did have a lot of flaws, unlike some of the other projects, I still immensely enjoyed it. And that's kind of where Rebel Moon sits with me too, is that even though I actually don't think it has as many flaws, but it it has some pretty glaring ones though. And I mean, Army of Darkness, all that stuff was superior. A lot of people say, okay, of the Zack Snyder films, a lot of people hate Sucker Punch. I didn't see that one. And now this one is kind of like the second, what they would call a misstep. But again, overall, I think that, the story was cool and all that stuff. So I still enjoyed it in spite of its flaws, even though I know they're there. I see them.
Gotcha. Um, I kind of like it. It took me a minute to really get into it, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I
but then once I got
I
into it,
know.
I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. Should it be a Star Wars? Should it have stayed a Star Wars film? No, I think it's better off kind of as it is. I will definitely say there's definitely a lot of overtones of Rogue One. Um,
And Andor.
some Andor,
I
some
found a lot.
Mandalorian,
I found this. If
a
this had
lot of
been a
Andor
Star Wars
references.
movie,
Yeah,
this would have been a lot like Andor, I think.
absolutely. Um, I guess we'll get into the technical parts about it later, but yeah, overall, I think that it was a decent movie. It wasn't the greatest, but honestly, I hate to say it, it kind of will fit right into the current batch of Star Wars stuff that been getting. So
Yeah,
take that how you
except,
want
but you
to,
know what though? But like I said, I mean, there's a lot of mistakes that Star Wars makes that this movie, quite frankly, didn't. I mean, there was some, like, okay, with the lead character Cora, there were some unbelievable elements, but at least we got a backstory on her, though. And again,
hmm
like you said, we'll get into some of the technical elements because, okay, this was the overall thoughts. Now, you basically open the door. We could talk about, like, right out the gate. And of course, certainly you guys who are watching this live, chat in and let us know your thoughts. And if you're watching the rebroadcast of this, put your thoughts in the comments section or join our Discord and let us know there. Because I actually did start a little conversation over at Discord about this movie. But here's the thing that I find interesting. I think it would have worked as a Star Wars movie because of, like, what you said. The fact that it's very, very much in the style of Rogue One, or especially Andor.
hmm
Especially Andor. I mean, this thing, it's almost like Snyder
They
basically used
re-
Andor. It was like a template.
yeah.
I mean, it was, and it's kind of like you said, it was actually better than a lot of the Disney Star Wars stuff. I mean, again, there was a lot of missteps, and we will go into that. But overall, I think the story was actually a lot stronger than a lot of the modern Star Wars movies. And I think that if you plop this into the Star Wars universe, it could have worked. Because here's the thing, and I want you to answer this one, and then I'll get to the chats because Voyager actually has rejoined us. We haven't heard from him in a while. But what what I'm thinking about this whole thing, the whole time I was watching this, I was thinking about the fact, I see a lot of the flaws in it, and I understand why a lot of people may have been disappointed.
Hmm.
But I wonder if some of that is due to the fact that it did start out as a Star Wars movie, and he had to de-Star Wars the thing in order to make it.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing for me when I was watching this. I was trying to really figure out, like, okay, like, what lens do I watch this through? Do I try to watch this as just purely for what's being presented, or do I look through the lens of this is supposed to be a Star Wars film?
Right.
Because or do I try to find some way to split the difference? Um, so I think that was like really my first challenge, even before pushing play. It's just like, okay, going into this, I try not to have any expectations of, but I mean, the title already, I loved it. Rebel Moon. That just
I
sounds
know.
cool.
Honestly,
So the
that would have
title
been a
was
cool
awesome.
Star Wars. It would have been a great Star Wars
Exactly.
title. I mean, it's like,
Exactly. It sounds like a Star Wars title, almost like where if they put like they were on Yavin or something. I mean, there you go. Um, but I don't know. I mean, yes, there were a lot of Star Wars overtones to it. Definitely, you could see some borrowing from a lot of different series, like you said, mainly Andor, a lot of Rogue One. Um, but I think that once again, in a way, it's almost it, it's it has the Force Awakens problem where it's almost too derivative. And I think that's the part
yeah.
where, for me, I think that's where you lose it, because it's like, all right, we've kind of seen almost this exact story before.
Well, here's a
So
good
you
point,
take it out of
though.
the Star Wars context, it can stand on its own because it's a sci-fi film you know um, that's kind of, maybe you haven't seen it that way portrayed before, but in Star Wars we have. So
Well, that's partially because Star Wars is an amalgamation of a bunch of different
true.
sources and films and stuff like that. In fact, one of them, Akira Kurosawa, The Seven Samurais, that's basically,
Hmm.
I mean, this is
Yeah.
almost like lifted directly from it. It's even more so following that storyline, or maybe like a Magnificent Seven, which was, again, following that template. And I mean, there was some, of course, we point out some of the Star Wars projects like Andor and stuff like that, but then some people, it's been a minute since I've seen it, but like Battle Beyond the Stars, people have seen a lot of similarities of that. There was a few things that were kind of Harry Potter-ish in there, particularly when Tarek the Prince was trying to tame that beast. That was, he was talking to it and all that stuff. I mean, there was a lot of, there was a little
See, right
elements of
there,
that.
the whole time I'm thinking of Ezra.
Yeah.
The whole time I'm thinking like, oh, what is he, Ezra now? I mean, like, I was kind of laughing to
Well,
myself.
but
I was like,
again,
oh,
it's because
great.
it's like you pointed out though.
Guess we're
Star
going to
Wars
see
actually
Space Whales.
borrowed from a lot of the same influences.
Sure.
So I mean, but it's kind of like you said though. I think that maybe they might have been a little bit more obvious. I don't know. It's sort of like maybe they could have gotten away with it more if it had been a Star Wars film versus, okay, because
Yeah.
I still think that a
'Cause-
lot of it is, hey, this started out to be a Star Wars thing, and now, oh well, we're not going to do it. It's like, okay, well, instead of just leaving it abandoned, I'll just do it myself. And
yeah. I mean, that whole scene with even the whole that weird spider lady looking thing. Once again, it reminded me of Solo.
it reminded me either
When
of Solo. I mean, there were like elements of Solo, but it also, I don't know why, but the whole like spider thing and frog lady from the Mandalorian, like that whole
Yeah.
scene. But
Hmm.
again, how many, even going back to Crawl, there's a bunch of other sci-fi movies and stuff like that that they always have some sort of like spider creature or spider queen or something like that they have to talk to. I mean, it was definitely following a template, but it was done well enough that, again, I didn't have a problem. I mean, sure, I was recognizing all this stuff, but I don't know, I was having a good time with it. Let's get to some of these chats, because they filled up a little
Yeah.
bit. So
Yeah, what
Voyager
did
says,
Voyager say?
he says, I don't understand all the hate for Rebel Moon. I liked it. And that was something that I thought too, right? Like I was watching this because again, I didn't watch too many of the reviews until after I saw the movie. And it wasn't because I was trying to avoid spoilers, because anybody that knows me knows I don't care about spoilers. You can spoil a movie all you want. It's still not going to ruin my enjoyment of it. I mean, sure, there might be certain cases where, there's some like twist or whatever that happens in the movie. And if it's happening when you see it and you're not even aware that it's there, it impacts you greatly. But by and large, I don't usually care about spoilers. But I wanted to avoid the reviews. One, I didn't want it to color my opinion of it because a lot of people that I respect, like the Critical Drinker, John Campea, they were all tearing this movie apart. And I knew they were probably going to make some good points. And my fear was if I watched their reviews before I watched the movie, I would have that in the back of my head going, wow, these guys are right. I didn't want that. So I chose to watch them after. But yeah, I could see, like I said, I could see the problems, but I agree with Voyager in that case. I don't really get all the hate for it. I think the people now are just trained, like I'm going to watch everything through this hypercritical eye because I think a lot of these big franchises have made these huge missteps. And it's just turned everybody to where they just don't trust anything anymore. Now they can't even enjoy anything anymore because they're trained to just see what's wrong with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think once again, my biggest thing was just that it felt too derivative
Yeah.
of, and I think that really kind of like, because I mean, that's the thing. That's the thing we've been saying as Star Wars fans is that we want to see something kind of fresh and new that still feels like Star Wars, but give us a new type of spin or new type of plot. That's like, oh wow, I liked how they did that. That was interesting. Now I think there's some great acting in this, like the guy. Let me grab his name real quick. But what I'm talking about that, like, Ed Scarin, Atticus Noble, man.
Oh, yeah.
I love that guy.
Well, and Anthony Hopkins
Love that
voicing the robot, I thought that was a really good performance. In
was cool.
fact, it really made me hope that they explore the robot story in the next one because there's like a compelling story there. You could tell
And that
there's
was
a
the
lot
thing.
there.
I was kind of wondering about that too, because it sounded like they introduced it, but then they took it away. So I was and I forgot all about it, and then they brought it back at the very end. I'm like,
Right.
yeah,
I know.
what happened?
Yeah,
It was
exactly.
kind of, yeah.
Well, let me ask you this before you get to, because you brought up something that's actually a good point. Do you think that you would have enjoyed this if it hadn't been a Star Wars project? In other words, if you didn't go into this knowing that this is supposed to be a Star Wars movie, and so this is just another Netflix movie that popped up by Zack Snyder, do you think that would have changed your opinion of it?
I think so, because knowing that those things, like you said, when you were talking about Campy and a Critical Drinker, you didn't want their ideas or their opinions to be in the back of your head while you're watching it, and you're like, yeah, man, you're right. So in the back of, because I know that's what this was supposed to be,
right?
Those things jump out a whole lot, brighter for me, because it's like, okay, when Tarek or whatever his name, I think that's his name, when he's like you say, he's walking up to that bird thing, he's got his hand out. And I mean, I get a lot of animal trainers do that.
Yeah.
Because you saw that like even in Jurassic Park, when Chris Pratt is walking up on the raptors, he's just kind of showed like, hey, look, I'm not here to hurt you. But once again, it looks like one of those like, okay, he might as well just been using the force at this point, and so, and the fact that that's kind of one of his abilities, that he's able to talk to animals.
Yeah, and the female swordsman, I forgot her name now. I remember most of their names.
Nemesis.
Yes. I mean, you
Yes,
could tell
Nemesis,
those are
once
supposed
again,
to be lightsabers,
supposed to
though.
be lightsaber. Exactly. And then she did the whole Ahsoka thing where she made
She
the
did.
whole. I was just like, okay, man, like really, like that's what I'm saying. Like it was stuff like that. I was like, okay, really,
So
how on the nose
basically,
are we going to be?
so what you're saying basically is that if it wasn't going to be a Star Wars movie, you think maybe he should have tried a little bit harder to remove a little bit more of the Star Wars influence out of it.
Yeah,
All right, well,
exactly.
let me
I
get
mean, I think
to
the overall story was good though.
yeah, it was, and it really made me want to know more about the backstory of it. I mean, I will say that what Zack Snyder did really well in this was world building. You know, what
True.
really took me out of it sometimes though was some of the sets, like especially that beginning one. It's like it looks like they're on a stage play. Like it's like she's on a soundstage with a big backdrop behind her. Like the very opening scene when she's
Oh.
like mining for a little rock or
Oh,
egg or whatever,
yeah. I
and
know.
it's like the big planet, which you see that right there.
Mhm.
It's like there was some things that it even looked worse than the volume. Like it it literally looked like you're just watching a play and there's a backdrop and again, I mean, there's a certain look that produces that I actually enjoy. It's why I like a lot of movies from the 30s and 40s and stuff like that because they have these they're almost obvious sets, but there's a certain surrealism to it that appeals to me. That look appeals to me. So Ted Adam Green has a couple. He says, I think Snyder and his more devoted fans are better off with his pure vision and no adjustments from corporate Disney. And I don't think Disney would have ever allowed the dual version releases. And with that, he's talking about, well, with the PG-13, the longer R-rated cuts designed from the start of the production. And I'm not sure which one I saw. The other thing is there's supposed to be like some sort of crazy 4-hour director's cut that Zack Snyder basically said it's a different film, actually, which I don't doubt because it's like twice as long as the one we're seeing. And he kind of did the same thing with Justice League, and it really did make a huge difference. And I will say that the director's cut of Justice League way better than the theatrical version. So that's another thing I want to point out too, that maybe when this director's cut is released, it might, like some of the criticisms might go away. I don't know. Voyager's got a couple. Says, I notice that critics and the general audience are more lenient on a movie the more violent and sexual it is. So I think you should have released the R-rated cut first just to avoid this hate. And then Sophia Botella, being a dancer and stunt performer, was great because she was doing her own stunts. Her muscles were showing, like she looked great doing the action scenes. And then Ted Adam Green comes back with a 4-hour is the R-rated, and it's coming in 2024. Only the shorter PG-13 has been released. Okay, so that makes sense. That makes sense that this is coming later. And you know what they're probably going to do? Because the second part of this thing is going to be released in April, they're probably going to release this longer cut right before the release of the second part.
More than likely.
More than likely. And that was the thing about Sophia Botella's performance. It's funny because there's a lot of people I notice on other reviews that pointed out that, okay, they've liked what they've seen of her so far, but is she really ready to carry a film by herself, like being the lead? And of course, they were all saying no. And then there was a little bit of back and forth on that. And I agree with the part where it's like, okay, I understand what they're saying. But again, and this is something that you and I bring up all the time in Star Wars movies, a lot of it is the direction. A lot of the blame has to fall on the director. You can't just blame the actors all the time, because the actors are only going to give the performance that the director wants. And if there's something that isn't adequate, or if there's something that, maybe it's just not quite there, the director's the one that needs to go, hey, we need to do that again. Let's try to do this, that, or the other, right? If they're just like, okay, cool, cut, we're good, then it's like, well, the actor's giving them what they want. So, I mean, I can agree with some of it, but I do think that you have to include the direction in this when you're talking about maybe some of the weaknesses of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think Kathleen Kennedy would have loved this movie, considering that once again it's the female,
I know, I'm really
lead. Yeah.
shocked that she didn't greenlight this thing immediately. I mean, I'm serious.
I know.
I'm
No,
really
I
surprised.
hear you.
I'm watching this movie and I'm just like as it's going on, like I'm an hour into it, I'm just sitting there thinking like, why did she turn this down? This seems to be the exact kind of thing she wants. I mean, especially this is another thing too. So there's, like I said, there's a couple of things that took me out of it. The constant slow-mo, the constant speed
Mhm.
ramping was just like, okay, this is being so overused. But you know what's not
Yeah.
overused is hitting that like button. Hitting the like button
Yeah.
is not an overused technique here on YouTube. So if you guys would be so kind, please do that. But
That was good.
I think they totally overused that. The other thing that sort of took me out too, I get it. She's supposed to be this like crazy trained fighter, that was trained by, like this insanely talented general and he's feared and all that. But it's like, even though I enjoyed the scene, when she takes out all those guards in the beginning, I'm like, I don't know, man. Those guys were pretty roided out, battle hardened. It's like there's just like a little bit of suspension of disbelief that I had to
Yeah, and like
that I had to say.
120-pound woman is just basically just wiping everybody out. It's like,
Yeah, these
If
guys
you'd have had Gwendolyn Christie, I could believe that. I
maybe.
could believe that more.
Well,
This
especially
is
because
because
of the element of surprise too, right?
and she's bigger. I mean,
Well,
she's
yeah,
so you could see her being more formidable.
right.
But
That was
you
kind of
got
like Kristen Crook as Chun-Li. It just,
exactly.
Ming-Na Wen, yes. Kristen Crook, maybe not so
Not so
much.
Exactly.
But that was something, it would have been nice to have seen a little bit more layers to the villains. They were very, very one-dimensional and rapey. It was like
Maybe. Wow.
they were just basically like
You don't hear.
the most evil. It's kind of like, okay, we're gonna be on this farmland, and yeah, all we're gonna do is like just try to rape all these women and do all. It's like they were just so over the top evil that I would have liked to have seen a little bit more subtlety. I think that's one of the things that Lucas always did, and I think that's one of the things that modern Star Wars is doing a little bit better now. It's actually one of the few things that I think they do right, and that is they're giving a little bit more subtext to even their villains, to where you see that the villains think they're the heroes. They think they're doing the right thing.
Well, I actually like the way that it's portrayed because unlike Star Wars is made for kids. I don't necessarily think this movie was designed for kids. Hence,
Oh, definitely not.
there's a whole 4-hour R-rated version of this. So I mean, it's really not designed for kids. So I think that when we look at, okay, some that one little patch of guys, or group of guys who were like trying to rape, the villagers. I think we did see the layers in that because on one hand, you had those guys who were lower on the totem pole who were just like, oh yeah, we have all this power. And it's like, no, you're really not the ones who have the power. This guy over here who actually stopped you all from doing it has the power. And then on top of that, you have the other guy, and you have Noble, who's like, okay, he's not concerned with that. He's more like, I'm all about controlling, um and he's more on the political scale. So even within that, you see like the hierarchy of villainy because the lower you go into it, like
Well,
you
you
have the
do.
lowest the common denominator.
But
You know what I
again,
mean?
even Noble, they're just all so one-dimensional with the just cartoonish evil. It's just so over the top. I mean, just because, you want to make something that's more for adults or something, it's like, give me some layers in that. Give me some actual character. Don't just give me this like one-dimensional guy with a twirling mustache that's just so over the top villainy. It's like, again, it's not like it ruined the movie for me. It's just, it just kind of had that almost like Street Fighter or, just
the boss at the end of the video game.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like there's not any, and the other thing too is there's of course two things that you have to look at. Number one, we might get that in the 4-hour version. I mean, let's face it, there's going to be another 2 hours, of movie there, right? So there might be more of that. There might be more in the other films too, like the second part.
Well, now and it even bears the question with the villain thing. The heck is he? Is he a robot or is he?
Yeah, I know.
Because see, that could be just a programming thing too. So now we have to look at it from that perspective. Like, I don't think he's even human. So
yeah, I know that whole thing was really bizarre. There's a
yeah,
lot of little
because
bizarre things that they were introducing in there.
there's a lot of things that aren't explained, and that's one of my issues too. Is that okay? I get we're in outer space, and I get all this stuff, but it's like, okay, you have essentially an android that almost acts as if they can feel, because when she's all rubbing his face, the one that Anthony Hopkins was playing,
Yep.
he's all like reacting to it almost in a way like
Mm-hmm.
he understands what that feels like. And then you have Noble, and that was a kind of a creepy scene. Like when you first see him, he has all those little ports on his body.
Yeah.
And then
that
he
was
had like
crazy.
it was like Boca, yeah. Then he had that thing that was like this weird alien Bocalet thing that was like a leech that was kind of like sucking stuff. I mean, it was just like, what the heck is this guy?
And then that whole Matrixy thing at the end.
Yeah, that exactly.
So no, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of different, and that was actually something that was a universal complaint. Once I saw all these reviewers and stuff afterwards, it was something that echoed my own issues with it, was the fact that when you look at the Star Wars movies, right, particularly the Lucas ones, and this was the problem that you just brought up in this one, is the fact that even though, yes, you're coming in the middle of something, yes, there's obviously a bunch of things going on, and there's some world building, you have to have a complete film. Episode 4 was a complete film. Episode 5, even though it was the middle of the trilogy, was a complete film. There's a lot of things that were left on the table and that were confusing, and even though, again, I think that they actually did come up with a really cool little world, and I'm definitely intrigued by it, and I want to know more about it, which is actually harder and harder to do as time goes on. But they did make something that we care about, but on the other hand, it's almost like they left more questions than answers, which usually, I know that's another technique that you could do too, but there was an incompleteness in this whole thing.
Well, that's because it's in parts too. So it's not like it's I can't even say it was like a sequel. Like, it's more like the story itself is broken up into parts as opposed to something being sequelized, if that makes sense.
It does, and that's exactly what it is. It's really more of a multi-part. It's like one
It's segmented.
film. Yeah, it's segmented. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the word.
Yeah, that's it. But I mean, in a lot of ways, though, that's fine. It almost plays out like something that maybe was based on a book, even though, I mean, it wasn't. But now here's
you said it's 4 parts to this, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Is there?
I don't know. I don't know. Is it?
I don't know. Well, yeah. Here's the thing, and I mean, again, this, and that's why I just wanted to do this show, tonight, was because at first I was almost going to ignore this, but then I started thinking about it, and I had heard about it, and I'm like, oh, this is the one that was supposed to be the Star Wars movie. So I thought, okay, well, let's cover that, and let's take it from the standpoint of, should it have been Star Wars, which we should delve a little bit more into. But I never really, I read about it a while ago that he was making it, and I knew it was going to be a thing that, okay, Lucasfilm didn't want it, fine, I'll just make this thing as part of my Netflix deal. Okay, cool. But I wasn't like really keeping up with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of a sudden it comes out on Netflix, and I'm like, oh, that's that movie that, was supposed to be the Star Wars movie, and he ended up just doing it himself. And that was really all to the extent that I knew. So I'm not sure. I know you're looking it up. And
There's three. Yeah, there's three more.
3
parts.
more. So it is a 4-parter.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of cool, Now, it actually makes me wonder, are there going to be director's cuts to each one of these things?
Yeah.
Because, there's very much a Lord of the Rings element into this movie, too. And I think that that's almost where it's going to be mirrored, right? You're going to have like this whole, okay, we have the theatrical version, and now we have this extended version. And that's what Lord of the Rings did. And that was a good idea. And it's at the point now where I only watch the extended versions when I watch them, because there's just so much more there. And I think maybe it was Two Tower. One of them had like a lot more. It wasn't just like an extra 10 minutes or something. Like there was another full hour and a half of movie there. And this is going to be like almost 2 hours of additional film there. So
yeah,
I am curious to see how that actually colors this whole thing. And then I'm curious to see, well, when they come out with part 2, 3, and 4, are they also going to do extended editions of those? I would imagine so.
It's quite possible. I mean, Zack Snyder is definitely known for,
Oh, yeah.
shooting a bunch of footage. So, yeah, that will be interesting to see if all 3 other additional segments to this actually have as extended scenes to them. Do you have a favorite character in this?
Ooh.
Like a standout character for you?
Yeah, it's funny because I really like the Korra character. I think she's cool, actually. But
Okay.
I like them all, but I guess if I had to pick one that I thought was sort of intriguing, unfortunately it was killed. I forgot the one tribe leader guy. Oh, what was his name?
Oh, Darian.
Yes.
Darian Bloodaxe. Yeah.
Yes. I thought he was cool. I liked his character.
Yeah.
I liked
I did
the whole
too.
tonality of
too.
it. He was very
Yep.
calm, he like there was just
Charismatic too, though.
Yeah, he was. And he was very, very different, I think, to everybody else. But one of the things that I really did enjoy was the fact that, to me, if you're going to create something like a Magnificent Seven or Seven Samurais type of movie, right? The chemistry between the actors and then the characters that you're writing is very important. And it's a sign of a successful movie when you actually have a bunch of characters that you don't necessarily like. You like all of them, for different reasons. I was very bummed when he died. So I'm like, it's sort of like you're breaking up the team,
Yeah, because you almost wanted to see more of him.
Right. But he was the one that probably, I think, stood out the most. I thought Tarek was a good character too. I really liked him.
See, and I wanted to see more of him too, and I thought he was going to be more warrior.
He'd probably be like my number 2. Yeah, I know.
Then, because just the way they have him depicted, you think he's almost on the same level as Darian, but he didn't seem to have it quite like that. Let's see. I did of course, like I said, Atticus Noble. He was cool.
Yeah, he was cool.
One of my favorites.
Even though he totally reminds me of Bison.
Yes, yeah. Especially when he's like in full dress uniform.
Yes,
man, he definitely does look like a Bison. Man,
that's what I'm saying,
so true, man. Like, get Raw Julia back out here.
Absolutely. That's just I couldn't unsee that. Even the
Yeah.
way he played the
If they were to
character was essentially the same.
no, absolutely. If they were to do like a modern day Street Fighter now, oh yeah, he definitely have
He'd
to
be the
play him.
guy. You wouldn't even have to change the
Um,
uniform. You just put him
yeah,
in that
just walk out,
uniform and kick him out there and make him,
just make him Russian. But
Exactly.
um, I also liked his sister though, Deborah.
Oh yeah.
She was cool. Um, and I think that's really. Oh, you know what? I like the father at the very beginning.
The father at the
The
very
one who
beginning was, yeah.
I liked him, man. He was,
Like
and I was
you mean
actually
the
kind of
like the
hurt.
leader guy? Yeah.
Yeah, he was trying to like protect everybody. He's like, okay,
Mhm.
look, and I really hated after he's like, well, actually, we do have a small
Oh,
I
I
was like, oh
know.
yeah,
Even
I was
though
like, you
I
know
actually
what?
grew to like that character though, the farmer dude. Cuz it's so funny because he's obviously like the wimpiest, weakest guy of this group, right? Like he's just everybody has to protect him. But there's just something about him that was relatable, I think. That you're seeing things I think in a way through his lens. But you're right. The actual leader, and they were sort of, it seemed like those guys, that village was kind of modeled after the Vikings. There's very much of a Viking kind of vibe to those
Mm,
guys.
yeah.
But you're right, man. I
It,
mean, I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, seriously? Now, I don't know. I don't know if Noble would have actually left them alone though. Like if he would have taken that the leader dude is at his word. Even if the farmer
yeah,
didn't.
but that's one thing I loved about like Noble, man. Just the way he was so calm. I was like,
Uh-huh.
everyone just looks so healthy, and
Yeah, I
I
know.
just can't.
I
It's
know.
hard for me to really, and like
Yeah.
just the way he was, and watching the father keep trying to come, like, well, see, I can see why you would think that. Just watching that whole
Oh,
biplane
it was
was
a great
really
scene. It was actually one
was
of
a
my
great
favorite
scene for
scenes of the
me.
movie.
Exactly.
Hands
Yeah,
down.
I love the dialogue between those two. That was.
And you could feel the tension in there, right? Like you were sort of on the
Mhm.
edge of your seat. You're like, "Oh man." I mean, you almost were put in the place of one of the villagers at that point. And then yeah,
Yep.
when he was brutally murdered, you're just like, "Man, that's just
And then especially when you think he's about to kill the other guy, he's gonna show him how to
yep."
keep his person
You know
alive.
what? I
You're like,
guessed
you know
that
what?
though. I
I mean,
knew
I
he
kind
was
of
going to
figured
do
that
that.
too, but it was kind of like you kind of hope that, I thought he was gonna actually kill him, and then he said, if I come back and you're lying to me, you're next type of thing.
That
That's what
could
I
have
thought he
happened.
was gonna
Yep.
do.
Yep, that could have
So I
happened.
I really didn't know which way he was gonna go with it, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even though
And I
I
didn't think he
I
was
more or
gonna kill
less
him. I thought he was just
guessed.
gonna severely beat him or something as a warning. I didn't think he was gonna kill him though. I was like, oh man,
I know,
I
man.
actually liked him.
Whatever that staff thing was like
I know it's like he was
insane.
like
It's like, what's
Boba
that thing
Fett.
made out of?
He's like
I
Boba
mean,
Fett and his gaffy stick.
yeah,
That's what it
right.
was.
I mean, the thing is like the thing just like kills people instantly. It's like, what's this thing?
Well, like you said with the speed ramp thing, they always slowed the stupid thing down.
Well,
Like you could see
yeah.
the thing coming a mile away. It's like, dude, like he knocked over King Leviticus or whatever. Like,
Oh, I know. That was another one. And I liked him too. I thought he was cool. I like that guy. I was hoping he would make it to maybe the next movie or whatever. And he had to known it was coming,
oh yeah.
you know.
Once I saw him on his knees and everything's up
Oh
in
yeah,
flames,
it's
I'm like,
kind of
oh
like,
yeah,
yeah, it's just
it's
over.
over.
It's over.
It's
It's
over
just
for him, man.
it's not going to it's like, look, dude, you're not going to make it through this. You might as well just and you could feel that he was more or less waiting to die too. That was the other thing. It's like
Yeah.
he had to have known it was over.
Yeah, man. Just pull the trigger. Now, you know what? I really loved but in that same scene, uh when Noble was basically giving the whole story, he's like, look up there. You see that thing? It's called the King's Glare, and this is why we call it that. And like he gave that whole backstory on like, yep, the last person was benevolent, and so we named it this to remind like, hey, don't he's like, charity? Nah. And I just loved that whole um whether it was true or not, I just loved the fact that he just kind of calmly tells this whole backstory of what's ultimately about to be your demise.
Yeah, now that was one of the monologues that I actually enjoyed. Because some of them, that was where I thought the writing was a little bit bad, right? It's like, you know,
Dialogue.
yeah, there's like, they were sitting at that one campfire, and it's just all of a sudden, Cora just launches into this whole, back at a time when it's like, nobody talks like this. What are you talking about? All that is a cheap way to try to get some exposition into this movie.
Mhm.
It's lazy writing. It makes no sense whatsoever. It very nearly takes you out of the film. In fact, some
Mhm.
people, I think it did take them out of it, but I was just laughing and just buckling up for the ride. But it's like, really? Come on now. But
Yeah, and
that
this, the
that
whole
one with
the whole thing
Noble,
with
though, you're right.
the princess, the little girl, and she had the bird, and she put life back into it. I was just like, okay, great. She's right now. She's, and the dog is just sitting there. I'm like, okay, come on. This is just stupid.
Yeah, I'm waiting to see where they actually go with that whole subplot, because it could end up being something sort of cool, because she was supposed to be the hope that was going to turn. Because I like the fact that,
Yeah.
the king was kind of like, okay, she possesses the hope and benevolence and all this stuff that I've just lost, right? Like
Mhm.
I don't have it anymore. So it's fine. And I was like, okay, that's cool. But yeah, when it started with that whole thing, and it was a little derivative to me,
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I'm just gonna wait and see what they do with it, though, because it could either pay off into something very cool, or it could just be, once again, another example of derivative lazy writing. We'll have to see. But the question, though, still is, as far as it being a Star Wars movie, I remember you said earlier, you're like, okay, look, I think it stands better on its own. That's still pretty much the
Yeah.
way you feel about it, right? Like, you feel it's better
Yeah,
as a standalone
because
movie?
yes, because I think if it didn't, especially if you removed if we didn't know that it was supposed to be a Star Wars movie, it would have been, to me, it's been fine.
Mhm.
The fact that it was supposed to be a Star Wars movie and then it wasn't, then you leave all the Star Wars esque things in there. Now it gives it a complete derivative thing, because now it's like, okay, if this were to be a Star Wars movie, I mean, you're just ripping off basically Andor, Rogue One, and parts of the series and whatnot,
Well, it
and
depends,
even some of
though.
the Force Awakens.
I mean, and stylistically, I would agree, but this would have been an opportunity to me to where you could have now started a whole brand new story. Like, obviously, it would still deal with the Empire, because it's obviously who they
Hmm.
were, right? They were even
Yes.
called the Empire, actually. I mean, that was one of the things. They were the Empire. You had the rebels, essentially. Kind of left that in there. And you could do
Hmm.
that because, I mean, that's, vague enough, right?
Yeah.
But here's the part, though, that is really fascinating to me, is that if this had been a Star Wars movie, they could have, and to me, this is a lost opportunity on Kathleen Kennedy's part, although that's no surprise. They could have actually used this as a platform to tell a completely different story, not involving any of the characters that we all know and love, different planets, different, like, it's still taking place in the Star Wars galaxy, but a part that we've never seen. And this can show
Yeah.
you that even though, the Empire's got this thing going on over here with the Skywalker and all that stuff, look, the Empire was all over the galaxy. There were
Yeah.
completely other story. Like, this could have been another whole section story of another thing, another world or set of worlds that the Empire was messing with a whole new set of characters. This could have been the way that you could have used the Empire, stormtroopers, Imperial officers, that kind of thing, is sort of like your glue, but you could have told a brand new story, brand new lore. Sure, you could have had her still being like a Jedi if you wanted. So there'd be a little bit of that, but it's a Jedi that's not necessarily connected to the proper franchise. And see, to me, that's where I think it might have made a really good Star Wars movie if they had approached it that way.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, you already had the world between worlds at the very end, which I thought that was weird. Um, when they reanimated no,
Yes.
and I was like, okay,
I didn't think about
they,
that, but you're right. That is probably a stand-in for that.
it was just like, okay,
Because
really.
that was very world between world-esque.
hmm I mean, all he needed to do was just change an invader a couple of times, and you know, it was just like, all right, that's what I'm saying, and that's what each time they did too much of that, it was just like, okay, it takes me out. Even the whole bird thing, um, like I said, reminded me of Ezra, but also reminded me of Obi-Wan in Revenge of the Sith when he's on that weird bird thing chasing Grievous up the mountainside, and Obi-Wan has, once again, it just
But I think that's
he
because it's supposed to be a Star Wars
right,
movie.
exactly.
But
That's
if
what
it
I'm saying
actually
because
had been a Star Wars movie, well then, and again, I don't think now.
I would have expected it, but then I still would have felt like it was derivative because
Right, that's what I was about to
you
say. Actually, you've
yeah,
been
you're
well, okay.
still
Now you're going to say it's ripping it off, which
yeah, it's ripping it off now. Which it's
well,
like,
but
okay,
maybe. I mean, look, that's like saying that if you feature a movie with horses, that you're ripping off whatever. I mean, it's like every
Braveheart.
Western is going to have a horse in it, right? If you,
Yeah,
so it's not necessarily, there's certain
no, but
things
I'm
within
just
the Star Wars universe. I mean, if they're using it in the same way, like exactly the same way, I could see that. But
well, no, it's just the way that okay, um, all right, Nemesis was basically Ahsoka. You had um what's his face? Who's the coward? I forgot his name. But he's like Finn. He's trying to run from the danger. You have the pilot that's kind of like Poe. He had um Cora, who's basically almost like a stand-in for Ray. I mean, like I said, it was just, and then the things that they were doing, um, and just like the abilities, Terry, use almost basically using the Force to talk to this animal to control it. It's just like I said, it's if this would have been a Star Wars movie, it's like, oh, okay, it would have been expected that they have these abilities, sure, but the fact that it's like, okay, you're essentially, but the overall story is still kind of one of the same.
well, in a sense
And
of that, it would have belonged in there, right? Like, because right
exactly,
now
right.
you're looking at correlations between Star Wars
Correct.
and then what this is. Where is,
Right.
and that's what I think is making that more obvious. Like, oh, here we go, the Jedi like part, right? But if it actually
Mhm.
had been in the Star Wars universe, I think your
Yeah, it's
focus may
expected.
exactly, but not only is it expected, but I think that if they had actually done the one thing that Star Wars fans have been asking for years, and that is give us new stories, give us new worlds, let it take place in the same universe, and let it be obvious that it's the same universe, because it's almost like Visions in some cases went too far the other way, where you're kind of like, dude, why is the Star Wars name on this? I don't even recognize Star Wars in this.
Well, that's why with this though, it was like, all right, but the overall story is something we've seen before though in Star Wars. That's what I'm saying. That's
Well,
so
but I
like
mean, well, yeah, but I mean, the thing is that if you think about it, the Empire, right, taking
Mhm.
over all this stuff. I mean, this is like, it's kind of like they're doing the same thing all over the galaxy. So obviously, you're gonna have the same type of deal. It's just, I mean, I know you're saying basically like, okay, you're just kind of tired of the same package in a different wrapper. It's like,
Yeah.
it kind of, it's like, oh wait, because that's what all of us Star Wars fans do, right? It's like we get this present, like, ooh, the wrapping paper's different. Let's see. Oh no, it's the same socks again. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Exactly.
it's kind of like, oh, they
Yeah,
kind of had me
exactly.
fooled there with that different wrapper or the different shaped box. Like sometimes they'll even go that far, like, ooh, the box is different, so it must be a different
Yeah.
thing. Nope, it's episode
See,
4 again.
exactly. And I think like so when you have stuff like the Bad Batch, Rogue One, that doesn't bother me because all you're doing is expounding upon what we already know that's already there. We're just going deeper into the minutia of it. So that doesn't bother me because you're just highlighting, okay, like this is what's going on. That's or you're doing the flip side of, um, for example, like okay, the Bad Batch. You're telling a story, the same story, but almost like it's like we always say, it's like Timon and Pumbaa, like that one Lion King 1.5, where
Mm.
you're showing how things are affecting now stormtroopers who was like, okay, wow, like we're getting phased out as clones, and this whole stormtrooper program is coming as the empire is starting to grow. Like that's it's the same story, it's the same Skywalker story. However, we're looking at it through a different lens on how it's affecting these characters. So to me, that doesn't bother me. But when you essentially are saying like, okay, here's something brand new, Force Awakens, and it looks like a New Hope. What's brand new about that?
Well,
Except for
I
you
think
just
it.
switched out some characters.
So it well, and that's the I don't think I don't know. I don't think that Rebel Moon was really as bad that way. Like Force Awakens. Well, first of all, Force Awakens was done. Whether you agree with the decision or not, it's a different story. But that was done on purpose.
Yeah, I mean, and I get I understand the rationale why, and that's the only reason why in my mind I let it go
Hmm.
because of that fact, because I understand it's like, okay, we're trying to basically bring this new generation to have the same feeling that you had. I can't say me because I wasn't there, but that you had in 1977. You see what I'm saying? So
Right.
that I get why they did it that way. But um yeah, like I said, if this would have been a Star Wars movie, it's like, oh, okay, this again.
Well, but
And it's
again,
like, okay.
so here's the thing though. If they had done this where it's not so derivative, but what they
Mhm,
do is they're telling you they're just what they're trying to do, I think, with this, if it had been a Star Wars movie. And there would have been some differences because again, he took all the Star Wars stuff out and tweaked things and tried to make it work.
mhm.
But what they could have done was showed you how the Empire is essentially having the same effect even on this side of the galaxy. And so you
Yeah, but
have people
we
reacting in
knew
the
that
same
though.
way.
Yeah, but I'm saying we knew that though. That's what I'm saying. We already knew that already. And that's why I said that story isn't new to us because we know, we knew that okay, the galaxy is not just comprised of Tatooine and Hoth, and even though those are the common things that we've seen in the original trilogy, we know that, you know, this is taking place the same thing that you're seeing on Ryloth or um uh Hacian, like everything is taking the same thing is happening at all and across the entire galaxy. So that's not a new story. What would
Right.
be
Well, you're
I
kind
guess
of
a new
saying,
story. It's like if you have like let's say another um faction that wants to take over, that's trying to overthrow the empire, that's but they're still like they're not the rebels. They're like another, almost like if you had like the First Order trying to take over the Empire or something like that. Like, okay, that's a different twist now because now you have this other faction that's trying to take over from what we thought was a bad guy, but he's even a bigger bad guy. It's like, oh,
well, but then again, though, if by that logic, though, then Andor wouldn't work. But yet you love that because Andor essentially, except for the fact that he is the overlapping character. So he is a character that we know. But you're
mhm.
essentially, you'll say that Andor is deepening the lore because, okay, we're seeing this other half, but that's all that Rebel Moon would have been doing if it had been a Star Wars movie, right? But this time the Empire would have been the overlapping factor, but it's just kind of like more of what's going on in the war because that's what Andor is doing. It's just telling you more of what's going on in the war. Now, I think that what you're getting at though is like, yes, you would say, but Andor is now showing us the political side. They're showing us kind of like a different thing. It's not
Not only not only that though, it's part of like okay, him like okay, him joining the rebellion and the beginnings
well,
of
that's
the
true. It is a
rebellion. See
prequel in a
that's a
sense.
yeah, that's a side we haven't seen. We saw the see we've seen the formation of that's what makes Andor so to me. That's what makes Andor so entertaining and just amazing to me because we're seeing what the rebels had to go through even to make the Rebel Alliance happen. So even though once
Right.
again we're still in that same sandbox, but once again it's still like a Bad Batch thing where okay, you saw we've always saw the Empire and the rebels, and it's like okay, but the rebels weren't always, and you're seeing the struggles, and it's like okay, sometimes you have to get your hands dirty. That's what made Rogue One so cool. And onset was like, oh, the rebels aren't just like these little white knights in shining armor. No, they had to get in the mud too, and and that's what made it like, oh, okay, this is a once, but see that made it different.
Right. Whereas you're going, okay, you know, this one's like Ahsoka, this one's another Jen or so, this one's another. It's almost like you're just
Mhm,
telling the same story with different characters that are all modeled after what you already
mhm,
have. And you're basically
mhm.
like, look, give me another side to this. You know,
Either give me
it could
another
stay the
side
same, but just give me like, yeah,
or give me a different, or like I said, just make it different altogether. That's what I'm saying. Like, had I not known that this was supposed to be a Star Wars movie, I probably would. I mean, I probably was like, "Oh, that's kind of remind me." It might remind me of something, but I wouldn't focus on that.
right.
But now that I know, it's like it's glaring.
Well,
Excuse me.
yeah, because you see, oh,
Hmm.
now I understand. Okay, that guy's like, an
Yep.
imperial officer, and this is Jenna or so, and this is Ahsoka, and
Hmm.
this, yeah, exactly. Like you kind
This
of
guy over here is Krennic, and this guy's,
right. You
it's
start to
like, all
see
right,
some of the similarities in that, and that is one of the
yeah.
things that I think is going to be the challenge for Lucasfilm, certainly moving forward with new Star Wars stories. Is like, how do you open this world up, create new stories in a familiar world without being derivative? That's going to be the
Hmm.
challenge
There you
moving
go.
forward for them. And
There you go.
basically, I think both of us can actually agree that if Zack Snyder's film had been a Star Wars movie, it might not have actually passed that test. Now, we don't necessarily know, though. I mean, that's why, to me, it's kind of a fun exercise, and that's why I wanted to do this episode, was because we don't really know what this would have looked like as a Star Wars movie. We're almost just putting the Star Wars skin on what we've seen,
Hmm.
but it might be more to it than that. It might be more
And maybe
changes to it.
in the different parts, like in part 2 and 3 and
That
4,
too.
we might
Or the
they might
4-hour
reveal.
version.
Yeah, there might be something like, "Oh, okay, now, okay," and then I might have a completely different view on it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, but it's interesting nonetheless. And I mean, again, it was overall, I liked it. I'm looking forward to the second part. And who knows? Maybe we'll revisit this when the 4-hour version comes out. That might be a fun thing to do. And, we'll probably, I mean, now that we've opened the door to this thing, we might as well include the subsequent parts now into our
Yeah.
discussion. Like, okay, once part 2 comes out, hey, would this have been the Empire Strikes Back of his trilogy? Or, what? We could explore a lot of
Mhm.
those things. But again, I think it is true that, yes, the challenge moving forward for Lucasfilm, apart from the Zack Snyder thing, is that you got to be able to tell new stories in a familiar universe and not be derivative. So that's kind of where that stands. All right, any closing thoughts on this whole thing?
No, I mean, I think it was, it ended up being an interesting ride. It kind of moved. I don't want to say slowly, but it just took a while for
Yeah,
me to kind of get into it.
there were some parts that did
There-
drag.
yeah, there were some, but it overall, I mean, they kind of, got to it a little bit, and then I just really wanted to see, like, some of the characters. You're like, all right, at first I didn't understand like why they needed the guy who can talk to animals. Like, why was that relevant? But then, it's like, okay, I see a woman who's, she's pretty deadly with these dual swords, and she's going, a great fighter. You got this general who, it's like, all right, big,
Oh yeah,
imposing.
Titus. He was cool too,
Yeah,
actually. He was another
yeah.
guy that I'm hoping we see a lot more of. But again, not to open this thing back up and start the engine back, but here's another guy where he gives that speech out of nowhere at the end. I'm like, dude, this isn't even your character, and all of a sudden now you're giving today is our independent / like Braveheart speech or something. It's like, where is this even coming from?
Well, that's because he's kind of coming, because remember, he was rejecting being a general. Now he's going back into it, and that's what a general would do.
I know, I guess, but it was just clumsily handled at best. But again, that said, though, he is a character though that I think is fascinating, is well done. I mean, I will say that they did take, at least if they're going to have derivative characters, they did give us a fresh take on some of them. Like, and they're and like you, I'm curious on the subsequent parts and everything. Oh, there's another thing I was going to point out about it too, though. That was actually cool when we were talking about the closing thoughts. Man, I hate when I do this during a live show.
They hate the pauses.
Well, I mean, yeah, I know, right? Yeah, they hate the pauses. But not only is the pause bad, but this wasn't like just some trivial point or something. I mean, this was actually like something that once we end the show, and I'm like, oh man, now I almost want to put it in the comments section. But hey, let us know what you guys are thinking in the comments section. You still got like 20, 30 seconds left. Chat in anything. Let us know what you guys are thinking. The question is, I'm going to put this up as a poll. I don't think I did yet. I may have. I don't know. Let me see. That's another thing that I got to start doing a little bit better too. I'll put these polls up. I don't think I did this one yet though. I think the last poll I put up had to do with the time, because our Friday show is on at 11 o'clock. Let's see where that one stands. That's always a fun one, because it's after midnight. Let's do this. Oh no, this is interesting. Okay, so nobody wants us to start at 11. The two things is 33% want us to go to 9 o'clock. I don't want to stay up late to watch a stream. But 67%, it doesn't matter. I watch it on demand afterwards. So that's cool. That's
Thank you
cool.
for the feedback.
Yeah, thanks for that's helpful, because, and that's one of the reasons, some of the polls, like I will put up a poll that I want you guys to not only answer there, but let's talk about it in the chats. Let's go to Discord and talk about it. Do you think this would have been a better Star Wars movie, or do you think it's perfectly fine as a standalone? So put that in the comments. I'll have a poll up tonight so you guys can vote on that. And yeah, thanks for the feedback, because, maybe that's what we'll do. Maybe we'll, if the work schedules and everything have stabilized enough, we can certainly go back to doing, I did 9 o'clock because it splits the difference. Because, a lot of times 8 o'clock, if we are working late on a Friday, it's like, might not be able to get back in time. I figure, okay, 9 is still early enough that people aren't just like tuning out or whatever, but it's late enough that it still gives us time to start the stream if we do happen to be working a little later. And then, of course, if we can't do it, we're always going to do like a pre-recorded episode or something. All right, so yeah, let us know what you guys think in the polls and in the comments section. And we're just going to look forward to part 2. And then, again, when the 4-hour part comes up, maybe we'll talk about that one too. All right, so with that,
All right.
We're going to leave it here. Monday, we'll do a retrospective show and talk about some of the highlights of 2023 and what we're looking forward to in 2024. So until then, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.